Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first Friday of 2022 at the School of Public Affairs. I'm Paul Teske. I'm the dean of the school, and I'm delighted that we have a terrific panel today to talk about issues around local democracy and non-professional politicians, perhaps running for office, and why that's an important thing for our society, for our state, and for democracy itself. Just very quickly, as those of you that are regulars to the first Friday, we are starting up again, and we will have events in March and April on affordable housing and innovation in government. Looking forward to those. And, you know, we're kind of waiting like everyone else to see if COVID recedes, as we hope it will, and we can be back in person and perhaps sharing food, whether it's breakfast or lunch, back at the terrace room at the School of Public Affairs in March or April. But we'll be sending out information about that depending on how things look and all the rules that get set. But fortunately, Zoom is a pretty good alternative, not quite the same as being in person, but it does allow us to continue to do these events. And thank you all for joining us. So today we're talking about candidates running for office, and our moderator is John Ronquillo. Dr. Ronquillo has been a candidate for local office himself, but he's a faculty member at the School of Public Affairs. He is an expert on several topics, including Indigenous tribe governance, social entrepreneurship, nonprofit management, public management. He earned his PhD from the University of Georgia, which is one of the top 5 ranked programs in our field. He taught at DePaul University prior to coming to University of Colorado, Denver, and the School of Public Affairs about 7 or 8 years ago. So we're delighted that John is here. I'm just also proud that 2 of our panelists, this was partly the idea behind the panel, 2 of our other faculty members, Callie Renison and Danielle Varda, are people who have run for office recently and have won those positions. Jeff Baker is an alum of the school, who's an Arapaho commissioner, and we have Kristin Seidel and George Brockler, who are running programs that recruit and develop candidates for these kinds of things. So we have to have a really great conversation in the next hour or so. And with that, I'll hand it to Dr. Ronquillo, our moderator, and looking forward to a great panel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dean Teske. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to spend the next hour with you and our distinguished panelists. We're looking forward to a robust and honest discussion on why we run for office, or why we help those who are seeking to throw their proverbial hat in the ring and make a difference in the lives of others through public service. As Paul mentioned, my name is Dr. John Ronquillo. I'm going on my 8th year on the faculty here at the school, and was a candidate myself. The difference between me and most of our distinguished guests is everyone else has won elections. So I'm asking the questions so you can tell me where I went wrong. But would love to hear your insights on what can be an incredibly tough job that many of you have done. And I want to go ahead and just jump right in. And I'd like to start with our newest electeds. We have Regent Callie Renison and Jefferson County School Board Director Danielle Varda, who were elected in 2020 and 2021 respectively. And would love for you to open for us a little bit. You know, the proverbial question would be, why did you decide to run for this office? What was the so-called tipping point that spurred you to really step out and put yourselves out there and serve in your capacities? And Regent Renison, can we start with you?
Certainly. Thank you, John. I'm a violence researcher. I've worked at the Department of Justice and then moved into academia, and all the work that I do, the research I do, the teaching I do, the talks I do, I'm hoping to leave the world a little better than I found it. And when the 2016 presidential election happened, something clicked in my head that living a good life quietly is not enough anymore. And I had the ability to step out and to run for office. So the first thing I did is I signed up for Emerge Colorado and went through the program, and it was incredibly helpful. Ran for Regent during the time COVID broke out. So it was an interesting experience and happily was successful. But it all boils down to having, I think, something that I can offer to make the world better for people.
Thank you, Dr. Varda.
Hi, thanks for inviting me today. And John, you never did anything wrong. I think I've learned how to run for office and be a public official from you. I think I've been talking about running for office for a long time. At least once I started to, I had all kinds of people say, hey, I was having lunch with you in 1998 and you were talking about running for office. And I don't even remember those conversations, but I've been in public service my whole life. I've either worked in the nonprofit sector or government sector, and I've just been really called to public service. And, I'm a professor, I'm a mother, and I run a business, and I always thought, well, let me sell my business one day and then I'll be rich and then I can run for office, because how can a regular, professor mom run for office? But then last year, for the Jefferson County School Board, the seat was open in my district, in my area. And I made the mistake of asking people who care about this, who was running. And the moment I showed any interest, I started getting a lot of phone calls from people encouraging me to run. And so I spent quite a while, a couple months, just kind of researching what it would mean to be in this position. Who wants to run for school board right now? It's like the question most people would ask. And I wasn't sure why, but I just love our schools. I have kids invested, in the school. I have kids, and so I'm invested in the schools, and I just care really deeply about them. And I felt like I could make that difference that Callie spoke about in terms of doing something, and decided to run after getting just a lot of feelings that I would be supported, I think, through the process, and understanding that there's kind of like a coalition of something that happens when you run, that I'm sure a lot of you feel and know, and feeling that was a really good synergy. So all signs kind of pointed towards yes. So that's why I decided to, and I still wonder if it was the right thing. No, I'm kidding. I was really very happy, when I won. And I've only been in the position a few months, and I would say every day is one step closer to feeling like this is the right place. It takes some time.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. It was a lot of fun being in the trenches with you, and it was nice to go through that experience with somebody. Mm-hmm. In very different jurisdictions and dealing with different issues, but happy that you were successful. I want to pivot a little bit now to our two somewhat more seasoned folks. Mr. Brockler, you served as district attorney in Judicial District 18 for, was it 2 terms, I believe? Prior to running for Attorney General. And Commissioner Baker, you are currently in your 2nd term, is that correct? And part of the reason I think it's great that we have you two as well is because of the local aspect. A lot of folks, Commissioner Baker, don't exactly know what county commissioners do. I think there's some conflation between what DAs do and what the Attorney General does. There were some shifts in scope. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Mr. Brockler, but both of you also, previous experience being a commissioner, Commissioner Baker, you were also involved with local police. And so both of you had experience as people involved in law enforcement and keeping our communities safe. I'm curious to hear what the experience was like for you. One of you still in office, one of you hasn't been for a couple of years. Same question. Why did you decide to run for your respective offices? And take it from whatever perspective you'd like to.
I defer to the commissioner.
Thank you, George. John, yeah. And first of all, I want to say also, I don't think you did anything wrong. I think timing plays a bigger role. I've seen candidates who spend an enormous amount of time out campaigning, doing the handshaking, getting their name out there. And it's more of a timing thing as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, my background's in law enforcement, both in the military. I'm retired from the Army as a CID special agent. And then I worked for the Aurora Police Department for 5 years. That's when I attended SPA and got my master's degree in public administration. Initially, I wanted to go into city or county management. And so I was working in government with the Aurora Police Department, and eventually moved over and started working for Arapahoe County Human Services. My wife is a social worker. So, and also when I was in the military, I specialized in crimes against children. So I knew how to interact with social workers and not let my law enforcement ego take control. So that's my background. And then I eventually changed into facilities management for the last 13 years with Arapahoe County. Before I ran for office in 2016, I was in charge of all of the Arapahoe County buildings, the maintenance crews, the custodial crews, and things like that. So I always thought if I ran for office, I would probably run for sheriff or something law enforcement related. But I was asked to become a precinct leader. I'm a Republican, and the current, at the time, the current county commissioner was Rod Boggenfeld, who is now a House district representative, and he got me to be a precinct leader and told me how to kind of work that way up. So I became more involved with politics, and when he fulfilled his term of 12 years, the seat was vacant, and I threw my hat in the ring. And it was something that I did after consulting with my family, even though county commissioners do tend to fly under the radar, so to speak. The biggest question when I'm campaigning is, what exactly do county commissioners do? And so I have a 30-second spiel I could give, but about land development and land uses in the county. But there's so many other things. And my family agreed that it was something that if I felt like I wanted to do that I should. And after a lot of prayer and consultation with my family, we did that. I won election in my first campaign in 2015 when I was campaigning for the 2016 election. I am on the presidential cycle. So every time there's a presidential election, I'm running for office. And that is somewhat a challenge because people are really fixated on the national race quite often. And the local races tend to be down ticket races tend to be not as well voted on and not as many numbers. But so I was running at the same time as Donald Trump, a very controversial candidate. And so I found myself explaining my position on the national, and then quite a few people would say, well, if you're not going to vote for Donald Trump, I'm not going to vote for you. And then I had other people that said, thank you for your position. And we are going to vote for you. So there's a trade-off in that.
Brockler.
I'm glad to be on this panel, by the way. Thanks for inviting me. I feel like I should be inspirational in a way to everyone watching this because I'm a knucklehead, man. I don't know what the Latin term for graduated at the very top of the middle of your class is, but that's me, right? Like I'm the top of the second half. I did not want to be an attorney. I did not want to be the district attorney. These are things that just happened. My goal coming out of college had been, I'd been in the ROTC program at the most military friendly school in the region, CU Boulder. It wasn't that military friendly. And I thought I was going to go on to be a tank commander. And some guys that help you make decisions about what to put in for in the Army talked me into going to law school and trying to take the LSAT and all that stuff. And it turns out I'm really good at multiple choice tests. But then I didn't want to be the district attorney. I wanted to go on active duty. One thing leads to another. I end up interning at the DA's office. And then I thought I was done with that. I'd handled cases like Columbine. I'd played a small role in the Kobe Bryant prosecution. I cross-examined the victim in a mock cross-examination. I thought I'm done. I went into private practice. And this is way back in about 2007, 2008. And a bunch of law enforcement buddies reached out to me where I lived in Douglas County in the 18th Judicial District and said, you got to help us find someone to run against the incumbent. And there was an incumbent from my party, a Republican whose husband was the chairman of the Republican Party. And I said, sure, I'll help you find someone. So I reached out to buddies of mine. I mean, Marines, Navy guys, Democrats, just trying to find someone. None of them wanted to do it. They said it's a fool's errand. No one's going to beat her. So these buddies of mine said, well, you should do it. I'm like, that's stupid. I mean, nobody runs against an incumbent whose husband is the chairman of the party. That's just, you got to have a screw loose. And so I ultimately did it. And it didn't turn out awesome, but it did turn out good in this way. And this is what I want to tell you about is in losing, there is something to be used in the future for victory. So when I ran in 2008, people told me, we don't know you. I mean, all the things candidates here, I'm sure John heard this too. You don't have any name ID. You don't have any money. You're too good looking. I mean, all the things that you typically get when you're a candidate. They never said the good looking part. And they said, we're going to bury you. You're going to get 15% of the vote. And we're never going to hear from you again. Well, as it turns out, I had a crazy group of buddies who helped me paper the entire jurisdiction with yard signs, which, by the way, I'm happy to tell you don't work. I ended up taking more than 2 and 5 votes in the Republican primary, and people left there like, who was that? I mean, who's this nobody guy that just did this? So I thought, I'm done with politics. I go back and I start a law firm with some buddies out of Denver. I end up getting reactivated, remobilized for the Army. I get deployed to Iraq. And while I'm in Iraq, a buddy of mine reaches out and says, hey, there's a DA's race coming up again. It's been 4 years. A lot of people are asking if that guy we can't name is going to come back and run again. We really liked him. And I thought, yeah, if I survive this, if I come back, sure, maybe I'll do it. And I did. And I jumped in. And if I had not gone down that road before and learned all those painful lessons, and John, my guess is you learned a ton of painful lessons too. If I had not done that, I would have never been the district attorney. I believe that. We ended up going to an assembly, and a 4-way assembly. And without getting into the details, I kept everybody else off the ballot. I became the district attorney, inherited a couple big cases. And then we're the only state in America that has term limits for district attorneys, the only state. And there's 2 4-year terms unless your jurisdiction opts you out. And about midway through my second term, I thought, I think I want to run for another office. I think I want to do more. I want to be more as a public servant. And so I ran for governor. And that was a crowded field back in 2018, super crowded. And then one day, the sitting attorney general, the incumbent attorney general, Cynthia Kaufman, who I thought had a great place to run for re-election, announces like 11 months before the general election, I've decided I'd like to run for governor too. The phone blows up. It's a bunch of people you can imagine, from money people to political people to neighbors and friends. And they're all saying, you've got to go run for attorney general. You've got to switch it up. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I want to stick here. I don't want to be that guy that runs into, and one thing leads to another. And there's nobody else that's going to run for it. Nobody. I said, okay. I mean, look, I'm like Mikey from Life Cereal. And if any of you on here don't know who that is, you're probably under 30, but Mikey from Life Cereal. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And to John, to your point, it's not about you doing anything wrong. It's more about what Jeff said. Our campaign was the hardest I'd ever run. It was also the most successful in the history of Republicans on the attorney general side. No Republican before me had ever received as many votes as I received. And I still lost to Phil, because Phil was a great campaigner. Phil was a great fundraiser. In 2018, if you weren't paying attention, it turns out not that awesome to be a Republican anywhere on the ballot. And so sometimes just being in the wrong party during the wrong wave year, and you should look for that in November, that can kill you. Just that alone can kill you. And so a lot of people down ballot below Senate and governor lose races for things that have nothing to do with them, not a thing to do with them. But, I'm hoping that I'm not done with public service, and I just appreciate the opportunity to, one, inspire you to think, hey, if that guy can do it, man, you can do it too. And then to answer any other questions you have. Thanks, John.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner Baker and Mr. Brockler. And for the record, I was saying that mostly tongue in cheek. I think I've handled my losses pretty well. And we're going to get to some of those issues as well that I feel that I saw up close and personal, especially when it comes to money, when it comes to what other resources you have available. And that's why I want to now pivot to Kristin, because you are, in all fairness and disclosure, I've had the opportunity to see Kristin's work up close as a campaign manager. She has worked with several groups in the state that people are likely familiar with, and now serves as the political director for Emerge Colorado, which is no easy feat, Kristin, right? You are a primary point of contact for women throughout the state who are looking to run for office. So the question is a little bit different from you, but I also want to use our brief time to pivot into some of these bigger issues. For you, I guess it could have been what inspired you to be an operative, to be somebody that the public doesn't see, to be somebody who pulls a lot of the levers that makes campaigns work. Why? And then I'm going to stay with you for a minute when you answer that question and pivot into some of the nuts and bolts of what you need to run a successful campaign on.
Yeah, thank you so much. John, thank you for having me. It is absolutely kind of like Callie. It was 2016. I was living a great life as a mom, just doing my thing, working at a local nonprofit serving the homeless population here in Denver, and really happy. And I realized I can't live that life anymore, and I had to get more involved. I also became very aware that I'm a white woman in a very privileged space, and therefore it was my job not to be the center, but to lift those around me who haven't been the center for too long. And that's really what pushed me into the operative side. I also hate public speaking, which is pretty key to running for office. So that kind of helped keep me back a little. So that's kind of where I ended up. In 2019, I did do the Emerge program, not to run, but to learn more about how to run. Really became passionate about representative and reflective representation. And that is where I bring everything from today is, do we have a reflective democracy? And the answer is no. And what can I do to make that reflective democracy happen? And so that is absolutely what inspires me every day and why I get up and do what I do with Emerge and beyond. So I hope that pretty much covered it.
It does. And I realize that I'm in the fortunate spot where, our concentric circles have overlapped, and I've seen you work with a number of candidates throughout the region. And I know it's hard work, and it's tough to convey because everybody on this panel has done the hard work of getting out there. And it's tough because you really do put yourself out there, and you hope that the niceness and candor that you exude will be returned. And we're starting to, well, not starting, I think we've been well entrenched in it, seeing an era of divisiveness that is probably the most amplified I've seen in my life. I think that we'll address this somewhat towards the end of our panel, but Kristin, I want to stay with you for a minute because, and this will go to all of our panelists or those who want to chime in on it. A lot of people don't want to run for office for a number of reasons. People talk about their fear of fundraising, their fear of public speaking, like you did, and we're grateful that you're getting past that fear to be with us today. A lot of things that talk people out of it, right? But you talked about, where democracy was for you and how you needed to make a change and get involved, and I feel very much the same way. I feel that there was, we needed leadership in certain areas. I gave it a try twice, 2 years in a row. I would not recommend that to anybody, but it was worth it, and there are no regrets. You've had wins, you've had losses, and it's tough to just, and I think Mr. Brockler, you went over that a little bit. It's tough to just kind of look at it as a win or a loss. And yeah, there's someone who falls into one column or the other and eventually goes on to serve. Kristin, talk to us a little bit about, if there are people out there, if there are, of our attendees today who are mulling this and trying to make that decision themselves, what are the good bones from your perspective for a successful campaign?
Yeah, first off, community. Where do you lie in community? What is your connection with community? What are you bringing to the table that isn't there now? And how can that move forward? If you're connected in community, we see it time and time again, somebody who you may never have heard of, but has been working in community their whole career, and all of a sudden they're lifted to a political space, even though they've never lived in the political sphere. Fundraising always comes up. And I will say most of the races that I have won, we've been out fundraised 2 to 3 to 1. So it's not the end all be all. It's about making a good plan and moving forward and knowing your plan and not getting caught up in all the other nonsense. And I think that's the hardest part there. John, I think you got text from me all the time. Stick to your plan. You know your plan. Go. And that really is such a key part of that piece. Know your message, know where you are, and yeah, you're qualified, you're good to do it. But we also have to talk about, when we talk about bringing in everyday people into office, Danielle already touched on this. We also have to talk about how it's not made for everyday people, because school board doesn't pay you. State Board of Education doesn't pay you. A lot of city councils pay you $18,000 a year. The Colorado legislature pays you $35,000 to $40,000 a year. These aren't livable wages. So we're asking people to take these jobs that aren't enough to live off of and have to also maintain another way of life. So when we talk about creating space for everyday people, we need to completely change this structure beyond just getting you to run, which is half the battle, but also make it to where it is where everyone can be represented and everyone can see themselves in representation, which involves a living wage for our elected officials.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I know that Emerge focuses on women, Democratic women. So for a pivot here, I'd like to go to Mr. Brockler. As I understand it, one of your current roles is as president of Advanced Colorado Academy. Can you tell us maybe a little bit about that and provide any additional context to the question that was posed to Kristin about what's a good structure for a successful campaign, especially as somebody who is drawing from the Republican side?
Well, let me say this, Emerge Colorado really is the model, and they've been so successful at what they have done over an extended period of time. If you look back over Colorado's political history and you start with the blueprint, and I know everybody on here knows what that is. I don't know if everyone watching does. If you take that as a starting point for a change in the way that the center left started to approach politics in the state at almost every level, and you carry it through, I guess, Emerge and to where they're at now, it's just an incredibly successful formula. And so after, I don't know, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, after the repeated shellackings that the center right folks had been taken, really because of the success of Emerge and other groups, a bunch of people came together and said, look, we need to come up with something that does the great work that Emerge does, but on this other side of the ideological spectrum. And so, Advanced Colorado Academy, which has been up since, I think we started it last February, so a year ago now, really what it seeks to do is exactly what Kristin said. And that is, I'm not as interested, we don't discriminate against them. I'm not as interested in the, I've run for this office, I've run for this office, I've run for this office. What I'm really interested in is trying to empower people from the neighborhoods and the communities who don't run, not so much because it doesn't pay enough and all that. That's definitely a logistical issue, but because the barrier to entry is that giant fear factor of, I don't even know where to begin. I don't have any idea how to do this. How do these clowns get out there and start a campaign? And so this 5-week program, and it's free to everyone, and that's a key thing. I don't want people spending money out of their pocket or their kids' allowance to do this, is to take them through all the different phases you can imagine, whether it's campaigning 101, campaign finance, some messaging, communications, things like that, with an idea that you may not ever run for office. That's fine. Don't care. We don't make them commit. And by the way, we're not limited to Republicans, but we are limited to center right. The idea is that you empower these people to say, okay, I can do it. I can be like Brockler was in 2008, make this reckless, crazy decision to run for office, but now I've got more information than he had. Maybe I can come up with a better result. So it's interesting to hear Emerge and how they approach this, because I really do feel like we're kind of trying to do the same thing, just for different reasons on different side of the spectrum, but it's that same thing. But my hat's off to you for Kristin, because you really do have the model, and nobody should ever quote me when I say this. I'd like to be you guys when we grow up.
So sorry, Kristin, I didn't mean to speak over you. I do want to follow up with something about that, because I find some of this curious, because I think, we've got both sides of the aisle here, but Colorado, and I'm kind of poaching a question from the audience already a little bit early, but I think it's important, especially given what you just said. We have one of the highest numbers of unaffiliated voters in the country. Colorado has been well known for that. I myself, for a long time, was an unaffiliated voter, in part because back in the day, people might not believe this, that a Democrat actually lobbied for law enforcement officials in Arizona at one point in his life. The standard practice was to unaffiliate, and I stayed unaffiliated for a very long time. up until the turning point that many of you mentioned, the election of 2016, when I decided to reaffiliate because for me, it was personal and I wanted my values to be reflected with the Democratic Party. When you talk about your the Advanced Colorado Academy and you say that they need to be center right, are you telling me, Mr. Brockler, that you would consider a moderate Democrat?
I don't think we would say no. And I imagine Emerge does this. I'd be interested to hear, but we do have a screening process. It's not just like anybody and everybody that says, hey, I think I want to go through this. There's an opportunity for an interview, and it usually takes place in a setting just like this. And the questions that you ask are things that are designed to say, some people have said, I don't think I'm center right. I think I'm a little bit left. And then they answer a whole bunch of questions about their views, whether it's on the economy or government or socialism. I'm like, spoiler alert, you are not center left. You are not, you are a center right person. And so some of this is an exploration of where they are on the ideological spectrum, but it is not a commitment to, you have to be a Republican. There's a bunch of people that are running for unaffiliated offices. That's not as important to me as finding people who are more values-based. That's when I say center right, and I imagine Emerge is the same, more values-based. And then we try to empower them, regardless of party affiliation, to move forward and do great things in their community. This is not a program, by the way, that is designed for folks that are like, I'm running for the US Senate. I'm running for Congress. There are a trillion resources out there for people. I want people that want to run for town council, for county commissioner, for school board, for sure. My God, we've had a ton of sheriff candidates. I mean, all of those community, local based offices, that's what we're focused on, not the big boy stuff, none of that stuff.
The reason I asked that question, again, drawing from some of my own experience, when I ran for House in 2020, I was sponsored on the independent expenditure side by a very large centrist organization. And I took some flack for it, which is interesting in terms of pivoting to a city council race that is technically all, nonpartisan, which is absolutely not true. I've gone on record with the Colorado Sun saying that the race may have been nonpartisan in terms of the candidates, but the money was 100% partisan. And drawing again from our great alums mentioning of the number of unaffiliated voters that we have in the state, yet we don't have any unaffiliated elected officials in Colorado. And so our panel here is reflected. It's easy enough to bifurcate us between Republican and Democrat, but I also wonder if that's enough variation, because certainly Democrats like to claim that they are a big tent party. And there are factions of Democrats that spar within themselves. And Mr. Brockler, I'm going to toss this out to you, not necessarily as a question, but let you know that I did tune into your radio show this morning and heard you talk a little bit about some of the inter-party sparring when you were running for Attorney General. And I think what's interesting, and as we kind of pivot to, I'm going to reframe this a little bit because I want to hear from Commissioner Baker, Regent Renison, and Dr. Barta again, but I find it interesting that we eschew that within our parties. But we, and I'm saying we because we're all human and we belong to parties, seem to be okay with the vitriol that comes across parties. And so what I find interesting, Mr. Brockler, was when you said, that we could take on a central right candidate. I've had hopes for bipartisanship, right? And I worry about whether or not that's something that is something that we can actually craft in today's day and age. I hope so, because some of the future questions I want to ask you are going to play into some of those deeply partisan issues that we have. So thank you for giving me that information. I might have some more questions on that. It's been mentioned a couple of times about sort of the reward or remuneration for winning one of these seats. Regent Renison and Dr. Barta have both won seats that are not compensated, at least in the traditional sense. Mr. Brockler as DA and Commissioner Baker were both full-time. It was a full-time job. You were not, holding any other jobs. And so it's hard sometimes because my assumption is, and given the jurisdictions in which you all ran, the amount of effort to win those seats, Arapahoe County is one of the largest counties in the state. The congressional district 2 for Regent Renison, and then the seat that Dr. Barta ran in for the entirety of Jeffco County. Those are large jurisdictions. And so I'm curious to hear some candidate experiences. Dr. Rennes and Dr. Varda and Commissioner Baker, what was your experience in terms of what we just heard from Ms. Seidel and Mr. Brockler about the necessities you need to run successful campaigns, as yours were? And I will go ahead and start with Regent Rennes.
Sure. Thank you, John. I think number one, and Kristin said it, is community. You need to have people surrounding you and supporting you, or you're never going to be successful. They're going to know more people than you know. They're going to have tentacles reached out in the community that you're unaware of. And without that, I just don't think you can be successful. I think another thing that's really important is just being authentic, being who you are. And if people don't like you, fine, you're not the right person for the job. But if you're saying what resonates with them, the populace can tell who's authentic and who's not. And if you're inauthentic, it's over. So that would be another recommendation. I think, John, what else did you ask? Or I think, did I hit it all?
I mean, I feel that's good. I could always tease some more out, but I'm keeping my eyes on the clock too.
Okay.
But I don't want to step on anything you might want to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to tease out a little bit, the compensation for all of your roles is clearly, there's a huge disparity there. But you clearly put in a tremendous amount of effort for the roles that you currently hold. So there was that issue, and then also the issue that I asked Kristin and George about having the good nuts and bolts of a functional and successful campaign.
Right. Well, let me say this. So yeah, regents are paid nothing. And it does take a lot of time, but I knew that when I went into it. And as Kristin also mentioned, I'm fortunate enough that I have a lifestyle. I don't have children that allows me to use my free time to do it. And I enjoy serving that way. So that's not a motivator. It's really not a motivator. I think it is problematic, however, because it leaves a lot of people just out of the running entirely. So it's just like college education, right? When it becomes so expensive, how many people can't go? How many potential cures of cancer are we not educating? So I'd love to see that changed over time. And I'll touch on one other thing that I think somebody here said about the parties. And that is that, yes, there's a lot of independence in this state. But the fact is that you're going to be more successful if you have the backing of your political party. They are very powerful. They know a lot of people. They're very helpful. So I would tell somebody who feels they're an independent, and that's great, but which way do you lean? And that's where you're going to go need that help. But if you just go out there as I'm a third party candidate, it's the fact of the matter is that's probably not going to be a successful run.
Sure, and I appreciate that. And that was something that certainly filtered into my most recent race in Aurora. I mentioned as a House candidate that I was backed by an independent expenditure that focused on centrists. But oddly enough, in the same duration of my own campaign for Aurora City Council, I was called both a socialist and a Republican, depending on which wings, because I was willing to sit down with people like Commissioner Jeff Baker, because I was seen with fellow candidates who were Republicans, and because I was friendly with them. That's my nature. And I'm also a professor who's a human being, right? And so as professors, our jobs aren't to be doctrinaires, at least in the School of Public Affairs. We give our students, toolkit classes that prepare them for careers in public service. And so my own view was every student who walks into my classroom deserves the same attention, deserves the same respect. And I've tried to carry that same mentality and those same behaviors out of the classroom into the city of Aurora, which I still love very much and wish had gone in a different direction. But, when you have results and when people make their choices, you readjust. Policy is cyclical. I'm sure there will be plenty of times to readdress some of the things that our city is confronting. Dr. Varda, let's move over to you with those questions that I had before about and depending on how much you want to spend on compensation, but maybe let's focus a little bit more on what made your run successful. Again, being our newest elected on the panel, what really did it for you?
Well, I think a lot of things folks have said, but I was remembering some of you know my dissertation chair, Dr. Peter DeLeon, and years ago I was talking to him about wanting to run for office, and he said, the first thing you need to do is get to be known in your party. And he was like, join it, go volunteer, and you have to be known. And he was not wrong. However, school board races are nonpartisan. That said, I am a registered Democrat, and that drew attention from a party, which is something that I think for people thinking about running for office, I just think Dr. DeLeon's advice was very good. Get to know your party early before you really want to run, because having that support is going to be pretty critical, whether we like it or not, that we have a two-party system. It is the way we work right now. And I think if you want to win and you want to make that change, you have to do those kinds of things. What I really got thinking about, though, as we were talking is, in Jefferson County, 6 years ago, we recalled 3 school board members. Recalling any position and then running a slate of candidates in their place takes an enormous amount of work in a very fired up community. And I think that we were worried people will have forgotten the work that took and the reason that happened. But I ran in a county that has not forgotten. And so, we knew that my win number was 90,000 votes, which, or just under that, I exceeded 90,000 votes. And we needed that, we needed to win in a county this large, that many. And so I think, and then having, the support of our constituents, the schools, the families, and the parents was absolutely critical for winning a race like mine. Again, that's a controversial topic for some people, but I would not have run had I not had that backing. I don't know why I would run for school board without the backing of the teachers and the families and the parents. So I think having momentum that you can draw on from the 2016 elections, whatever that was, we talk about in the School of Public Affairs, there's a window of opportunity. And if you can catch that and jump through that in that moment, that's a really important thing to look for to win a race. And to be honest, I looked for that because we all do. I really like winning, right? Like I like thinking, and I thought this is a race I can win because I feel like I'm on the right side. There's momentum, and this is a community that has not forgotten. But I did want to say one thing about compensation in a couple ways. So I do have 3 young girls. I actually have other positions I volunteer for. I have a couple of full-time things I feel like I do all the time. And suddenly when I was running for the campaign, I think because you are on school board, you're asked to attend all of these community meetings. And schools touch everything. So suddenly I get an email that says, Thursday, the Chamber of Commerce is having a school board candidate forum. So be there at 11 on Thursday. And you were criticized, if you don't show up. So suddenly I had to attend multiple forums a day for weeks on end. And one would be like, these are the 7 questions and you're going to get 2 minutes to answer each one. And the next one would be like, we're going to have 3 questions. We're not going to tell you what they are, but be ready, and you'll have 5 minutes for each one and you're going to spar. It's so uncoordinated that for regular people, just trying to run for the office is overwhelming and almost inaccessible. If you have a job that's not flexible, you cannot run for office. So that means the people running for office aren't representative of the citizens that we are in communities, moms running who work, right? And then after winning the election, we run a school district of 80,000 kids with 14,000 employees and over $1 billion budget. And there's 5 of us. And I came out of a 7.5-hour board meeting last night, which when we talk about divisiveness, I can say a lot about what happens at board meetings. During COVID, especially. And tomorrow I have a 6-hour board retreat. And, next week I have the audit committee, and it's really another part-time, at least job, if not more. I like Callie, am not motivated by whether I would be paid or not, but I think just touching on the absolute responsibility of these positions and the way that we can support people who want to run in these positions would have to shift enormously to be better supportive of everyday people running. So it is a very, very time consuming position to run in. And there's consequences of not participating. Of course, even the emails that we get, I probably have received 200 emails on one topic over the last 24 hours. And they'll yell at you, is what I was trying not to say, yell at you about how you're not responsive, or they can tell they got a form letter. And I hate that. I want to be really responsive, but there's just only so many hours in that day. And so I'm very specific. Like I will spend Monday, 10 to 5 on school board work, and I just block it out, and I just try to schedule all my school visits on that day now, and then I do my university work, and so I'm fortunate that I have flexibility in all the things that I do. But yeah, there is a lot there that got me all fired up inside as you were asking the questions.
Good. No, and thank you, Danielle and Callie, both for those answers. I'm looking at the clock, and I want to be mindful of time. I still do want to pivot to Commissioner Baker to slightly change our topic a little bit as we're getting some of the audience Q&A going. There's some themes that I'm seeing in some of these questions, and hopefully we can capture them a little bit. I want to frame this a bit in terms of going back to that element of bipartisanship. I've talked to a lot of people as a candidate, as a professor, as just a human being, who don't believe in that, who feel that we are too polarized to be able to come together and create a consensus and to focus on policies. Our legislature loves to tout the idea that well over 90% of the bills that are passed are bipartisan. But I think what we see trickle into the news is anything but. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because Commissioner Baker, I first met you as a member of the Arapahoe County Foundation Board of Directors when you were on that. I know that they cycle commissioners out, and I've had an opportunity to get to know a lot of our commissioners. And as a professor of public affairs, as a professional nerd, so to say, I know what commissioners do, but a lot of other folks don't. But I want to sit and talk with you a little bit on this idea of bipartisanship, because it's not common for professors. And I would say the School of Public Affairs at CU Denver is probably a unique outlier in that we have some political connections. Not only Danielle as a school board director, Callie as a regent, myself having run for 2 offices. We also have a congressional spouse who is one of our colleagues as well. When I decided to run for city council, I wanted to chalk up that nonpartisan element. And I think some people feel that we are too divided. And what's the impetus for a so-called moderate to run if they're just going to be, and I believe the word that was used in the Q&A was shellacked by either of the opposite poles. You and I sat down, I had coffee with you. I wanted to talk to you about your experience working with the city of Aurora. I ran because I believed that our city needed leadership and needed guidance with a lot of weighty issues that we are dealing with. And I wanted to seek your guidance. I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican. How can we amplify that? Are those days gone? Were we a unique example where we sat down for coffee, or is that something we can try to craft for the future?
I don't think they're gone, John. I really don't. The Arapahoe County Board of County Commissioners is 5 commissioners. And right now, we have 3 Democrats and 2 Republican. And I do think county commissioner is the first level of elected office that becomes partisan. You run as a member of a party or as an independent. I agree with what all the panelists have said about needing the machine or the process of caucus to county assemblies in getting those, getting candidates more ready to run. And I think that that's why we see that. But I don't think, and this is new for us, this Board of County Commissioners that just took office in 2020, in 2021, after the election in 2020, having 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So the majority is on. Now we Republicans on the Board of County Commissioners are seeing how life in the minority position is. It hasn't been a whole lot different. All of 5 of the Arapahoe County Commissioners like each other. We get along. We vote 95 to 99% of the time unanimously on land decisions, whether a Starbucks should go on a certain street corner or whether a housing area should be allowed to develop. We are very well compensated. A starting commissioner starts out at 113, and we are a full-time job. I think I put in between 60 and 70 hours a week, not only on the Board of County Commissioners, but we also sit on many other boards. I'm the county's representative on the Denver Regional Council of Governments. I also represent the county on the Centennial Airport Foundation, many water entities, authorities. And so it's a very busy time. That helps us get out in the community. You may run as a partisan. I believe campaigning is partisan to a certain extent. But when you get into office, you serve everyone. It doesn't matter when someone calls you and says, my road's not being plowed. You don't check to see whether they belong to your party or another party. You call the Public Works Department and find out why their road isn't being plowed. You help people independently. And I think that that's the most important thing to remember, is that once you get into office, you're a public servant and you serve everyone equally.
And that's a terrific answer, Commissioner Baker. And that's part of the reason why I sought you out, because I think that you have distinguished yourself as somebody who serves for the sake of service and for the residents of Arapahoe County. And I think that at the local level, that's important. I think that that's what's distinguished local government from, earlier we had a couple of people note, Mr. Brockler in particular, I think you mentioned, or maybe it was you, Commissioner Baker, people who are fixated on the national races. Yes. But we've seen some of the national race behavior, so to say, trickle down to our local races. I certainly felt that in my race just last year. And
I won by 164 votes out of 82,000 in 2020. So, your opponent is also a gentleman and a scholar, Idris Keith, a wonderful person, and that was a competitive race. But we have those types of races out here in Arapahoe and in Aurora. I lost my legislative primary by 400 votes. Omar Montgomery lost the mayor's race by 215. We pull out squeakers out here on the east part of town. So, but thank you for that, Commissioner Baker. On that line, and as our time starts to dwindle, I think it's important to continue to address this because, and I will apologize in advance that each of the audience questions that are coming in will probably not get asked in total, but I'm trying to pull themes from them so that we can respond to this, is that we have seen the trickle down, so to say, of the national politics. We are now in the second month of 2022, and we're still asking questions as to whether or not we believe the validity of the 2020 election and whether or not Donald Trump won or lost. That's not a question I'm interested in asking our panelists today, because I think we need to move on. But I think questions like that continue to permeate our discourse are very important. I'm concerned as a citizen, as a scholar, as a leader in our civic space about where we find ourselves with perpetually questioning the integrity of elections. And I think that sometimes while we're talking about all these good things, we have to realize there are some very vitriolic, and that was another word that was mentioned in the audience Q&A, behaviors. Mr. Brockler, I'm not asking you this question as a gotcha question, but I did mention that I listened to your radio show this morning. And I appreciated the dialogue that you had with your daughter, who sounds like a very intelligent, headstrong person that can go toe-to-toe with you. But you asked her, and as somebody who teaches our public service ethics and leadership course, I'm curious to know this, and this is a question I want to ask everybody. You essentially asked her, in reference to the Douglas County teachers sick out today, is it okay to lie to achieve political objectives?
I did ask her that. I didn't know if that was a true false question or if you want me to expand on that. Yeah, I did ask her that, and you could hear.
No, I know you asked. I'm interested in knowing how you all feel about that, because that's sort of where some of the vitriol stems from, right? Is we we're trying to seek out truth, but it's easy for us when we get siloed into our sides to then call into question whether or not we're telling truth. So I'm curious, from your perspective, your experience, how would you answer that question that you posed to your daughter earlier this morning?
Yeah, I'd say no. I'd say I disagree entirely. And I say, when you see it happen, you encourage the kind of skepticism that it's hard to get back that trust. I'll give you an example. And I know this is politicized, not for me. I'm a dude that's been vaxxed, boosted. I think I get a booster shot every week. I'm kidding. But I mean, I'm all in, mask, the whole thing. But when Dr. Fauci came out and said, hey, masks aren't going to work, don't use masks. And then some months later said, well, I said that so there wouldn't be a run on masks. All you've done now is to arm that side of the ideological spectrum that was inclined to want to hate this whole thing to begin with and go, see, can't trust that guy. Can't trust that guy. And they get dug in. So when it comes to matters of public service, that trust that you have with the community is so very fragile. It's so very fragile. And there's such built-in skepticism anymore with people who are in elected office. If you give them a reason to doubt your veracity, that's it. It's over. You don't get to get that back. So that's what I was talking about with my daughter. And I want to hear other people's answer on this. But let me tell you, the thing in my mind, having, listen, I'm 32. I'm kidding. I'm not 32. The thing that has changed politics the most and for the worse, undeniably, in my opinion, is social media. Social media has kept us from doing this, either in person or on Zoom. And what you experience with Jeff is what I think 90% of the time you'd experience with people on the other aisle. If you could sit down and have conversations with them. I get along great with Leslie Herod, James Coleman, Rhonda Fields, Alec Garnett. Individually, I get great with them. But you get on social media and all of a sudden there's no nuance. There's no ownership because you can be anonymous. There's just a few characters, a few short barbs. And it has really crushed the ability for us to span the distance between us, which shouldn't be that great. The other thing I'd say, and I see a bunch of the questions here, and they're really smart questions. People say, well, what if you're a moderate, unaffiliated? Listen, at least for now, unless you're a self-funder, you ain't going to win unless you're on a party, right? That's just how it is. Unaffiliated also does not mean nonpartisan. You know that there are people that are unaffiliated. They don't want to be Republicans because the Republicans are too weak, or they don't want to be a Democrat because the Democrat isn't progressive enough. So, but they'll vote that way. So the idea that, hey, there's a vast unaffiliated thing and that's a reflection of moderation, that is not true. It is the moderates that determine the outcome here. And we got to figure out a way to speak to them and get them involved. And we've asked them to be part of primaries where you don't even have to put on the jersey. That's all good stuff. But this idea that I don't want to wear a jersey, but I'm going to run for office, then you're going to do what John did. You're going to have to run for city council. You're going to have to run for school board, something where the R and the D don't show up, because there is such a built-in infrastructure that exists for Republicans and Dems that if you're going to run for anything where that matters on the ballot, you got to be part of that team, unless you're a self-funder. I mean, if you have a ton of money, you might be able to do it. But even then, I think it's super tough. I'm sorry to go a little far of a field, but I wanted to address just some stuff I see there.
It's 1 p.m. and with the grace of our attendees, for those who can stay, as well as our panelists, I'd like us to stretch us out maybe 10 more minutes, because I think that this is an important discussion, and would love to hear everybody else. I know it's a bit of a pointed question, and one that I would assume in general anybody who wants to serve in public service would say that no, it is not okay to lie to achieve political objectives. But I think it's important. And even if you're willing to give short answers, let's hear it. Kristin.
I don't know if I have a short answer. I have a lot to say, but I'll keep it as brief as possible. So I think when we talk about lying to meet a political objective, I'm really curious about the context that this happened in. Was he talking about the teachers calling in sick for the political objective of making their voice heard for an education system that is actually going to serve the students and serve the educators? Yeah, as an activist, absolutely, that is a tactic to be heard. Now, are you talking about somebody who is sitting in political office lying to get vote? Absolutely not. That is not okay. That is not a black and white question. That is not here or there. There is context to be had. I 100% support the teachers in what they did to be heard. And they should be heard. But would I support DA George Brockler lying about evidence? No, right? It's a big difference, which I'm not saying you would do. Sorry, I believe, but there's a big difference between those two things. There's the activist road and the politician road, and those are two different roads, and we have to acknowledge that in this conversation. And two, what Mr. Brockler was saying, and I think he was spot on when we talk about unaffiliated voters, unaffiliated doesn't mean nonpartisan. A lot of our unaffiliated voters are unaffiliated because the parties don't go far enough. And to assume that an unaffiliated voter is unaffiliated because they are middle of the road is a poor exception. Where I differ from George is it's not the middle of the road voter that makes the decisions. It's how do you motivate that voter who doesn't show up? How do you give them hope in you and make them see themselves in you to show up to the ballot box? And that's where it comes down to. So I think I covered it. If not, I'm sure there's follow-up, but I definitely think it was a much more complex question.
It is. And again, as a moderator, I don't want to take up too much time. I think you can stratify it a lot of different ways. I mean, I don't want to seem oblivious to the fact that what Mr. Brockler mentioned in terms of people he gets along with, Leslie Herod was somebody he mentioned, and clearly politically they're on opposite sides of the aisle. I don't deny at all what he said. There are plenty of people that I know who differ in terms of political opinion, and the social media aspect, I think, is something that's spot on. But I think another question I would have is, why do we let that persist? I mean, on the campaign trail, I was always friendly to my competitors or opponents. Sometimes I don't like to say opponents, but for the sake of our own discourse. But yet, I mean, I was outspent 10-1 by an independent expenditure committee that sent thousands upon thousands of negative mailers with my face on them to voters in Aurora. And so when I look at that question about whether or not it's okay to lie to achieve political objectives, that's exactly what that independent expenditure did, is they lied about me and what my policy priorities were. And that's what I find incredibly unfortunate, because I do think that the ethos of what George said is important. And I think, Mr. Brockler, it's important that it came from you, to tell you the truth, because we know that you're on Twitter. We know that you have a platform
because
on
of the hidden evidence thing. I've never done that. I'm
No,
kidding.
not the hidden evidence thing. I think because you have had a long career in public office, people know who you are. And hearing that from you, I think, is really important to say, you know, why can't we knock out the social media vitriol and just build up friendships? Like I've seen it. I've seen it, George. I've seen where people come from very different standpoints in terms. I've watched Alec Garnett and Patrick Neville have civil conversations, and they're about as opposite as you can get. But I don't always love how we feed into the media or social media to chalk up things that Kyle Clark on 9 News is going to talk about, on his show. And Danielle, we thank you so much for being here. I know we went over time and you've got another obligation.
I apologize. I have another obligation, so I have to go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
So at the end of the day, and it was a question that I kind of posed to Commissioner Baker, is, are we going to be able to sidestep that vitriol, or what is it going to take?
I think it's something we can overcome. I really do. Maybe because I just see, I mean, I go to Republican meetings and I hear what Kristin mentioned about folks that are probably close to leaving the Republican Party because they want it to be more conservative, more antagonistic. And I have to be able to absorb that and listen to it and kind of rectify my private feelings about what I'm doing here and how I'm making a difference and how can I maintain my Christian values and so that's my answer about the lying, is that it's never acceptable to lie. What I find is difficult as an elected official is sometimes being asked for information that I'm not at liberty to disclose because we may have discussed something in executive session where my fellow commissioners have an expectation of privacy. And we may have come to a decision, whether that's a 3-2 decision or a 4-1 or a unanimous decision. It's not good to share. I've got to go back the next day and work with my fellow commissioners. So am I going to go out to George's show, go on George's show and say, well, Commissioner X voted this way and Commissioner Y voted that way? That's not the way to continue to do business. So I do think that there's a way in your smaller group, as the group expands, as you go outward into larger venues, such as a party, you're going to have to come to some kind of way to deal with those folks that are, and the best policy is honesty. You've got to be true to yourself. You've got to tell people how you believe, but be open to changing your mind here and there.
Absolutely. Thank you. In our dwindling minutes, I just want to shift to what I think a lot of people are curious about. Sadly, I think some of the Q&A, which many of you can see, there's a little despondence from some of our attendees because they realize what a heavy burden this can be to bear, which all of you have done in your different ways, different experiences. You've all run big races. The three of you as candidates, Kristin as an operative. And there's a lot of emotional toil that we go through to do this. And I don't think that has any partisanship. I think that we're all human with emotions. And, we have biological needs that we've seen that this wreaks havoc on our own bodies. But at the end of the day, one of the questions that was asked was that we have a school here, fantastic school of public affairs, of which I and I'm sure Callie and Danielle are all very pleased to be faculty members of. We do have a lot of students who want to make a difference. And I would love to see us get past this despondence. I would love to hear as we close out today your parting thoughts on people who are considering running for office and any encouragement. Let's leave on a high note. For as difficult as politics are, I would love us to leave on a positive note, go into the weekend with a vision for hope for the future. Callie, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, John. If you're thinking about it, I say go for it. I have been a professor. I'm a full tenured professor. I've been an associate dean. I have been the director of the Office of Equity and Title IX coordinator at 2 campuses in the CU system. And I didn't feel that I was able to get work done that I really wanted to. Becoming a regent has changed all of that to the point that I have to be careful what I ask for because people move. So it is a way, there's definitely power associated with it. I think this comes back to the honesty and ethics element that everybody's spoken of, that you have to be ethical in how you use that. You have to be ethical in, honoring executive session and not sharing things, even though you'd love to share some things, but that's part of the role. So I say absolutely do it. I'm sorry, I forgot who mentioned it first. Getting involved with the local party is key. You might even find out that maybe public office isn't your thing, but being a campaign manager is, or being precinct leader. So I say go out and do it. It is open to everybody, and we need everybody, and we need the diversity of life experience that people have to try to overcome some of these other hurdles that does make it challenging. I also want to say, in case I don't get a chance to speak again, John, there were a lot of really great questions asked today. Anybody is more than welcome to email me at callie.renison@ucdenver.edu, and I'm happy to go ahead and respond to them if you're interested. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Callie, and thank you for availing yourself. Mr. Brockler.
Yeah, look, I want to tell you, do it, and the rewards are better than the negatives, but there's something here that somebody mentioned that's true, and this just isn't for everybody. It just can't be. If you're not capable of getting into the ring and taking a punch, and sometimes those punches feel unfair, and John described one of those examples. If you can't do that and then continue to move forward in a positive way with the rest of your life, do not get in the ring, because this is not for the faint of heart. And I'm not telling you got to be in there and play rusty knife politics. I'm saying you have to be in there and be prepared for everyone else to be playing that game at your expense sometimes, But at the end of the day, the toughest, bestest job I've ever had was as district attorney. I mean, the responsibility, as you can imagine, for any of these positions is remarkable. I mean, it's a remarkable amount of stress that you take with you. And it is one thing to say words on the campaign trail. It's another thing to have to put them in action and respond to them and do stuff when you're in the position to do it. I think the other thing that makes being an executive, whether it's county commissioner or regent or DA, different than, say, the legislature or even city council, is there's nobody else to look to for some of these hard decisions. People come to you and they bring you a case or they bring you something. You don't get to like take a poll. What does everybody think we ought to do? And look around and that's a really, it's you. And there's something really super challenging and stressful about it, but also something remarkably rewarding about it. And so if you're interested in doing it and you can suffer to lose, you can suffer a loss, go to it, man. There's only a couple things you can do that separate you from everyone else in your community in terms of civic engagement. And running for office is one of those things. Jury service is the other. So my recommendation, please do not try to get off of jury service. We need good people who are, from the community. Please serve on juries, don't get off. But the other thing is run for office. Win, lose, or draw, man, you don't want to have that itch not go scratched and wonder 10 years from now, like, could I have made it? Find out. And if you lose, great. Then you tell people, I ran for office once. Wasn't awesome, but I did it.
Thank you. No, I would echo what both you and Regent Medicine said. I know for me, the question persisted of, if I don't, will I question for the rest of my life if I should have? So, and as somebody who was unsuccessful twice in very close races, I don't regret it at all. Kristin, let's go to you and then we'll go to Commissioner Baker and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it if it's right for you. Like I said, look at the race. Do you have the community? Are you bringing something new to the table? If there's a conversation not being had that you're ready to have, then go out there and lead that conversation. We need people to do it. It is hard. It does take a piece of you. So the first thing I always say to all of my candidates is be proud of what you say every day. Live your morals, live your values on the campaign trail. And so you could go to sleep feeling proud of yourself every day. Know you left it all on the table and be proud of what you did, but absolutely get out there, do it, push the narrative. That's the only way change happens, is when we're getting out there and making new conversations happen. Same thing that Callie said. If anybody has any further questions from me, please feel free to email me at kristin@emergeco.org.
Thanks, Kristin. Commissioner Baker, leave us with your final thoughts.
Well, thank you, John, Dean Teskey, everyone. Emma, you were great getting us all set up to do this. The question that resonated most with me was, are you really making a difference? And I believe I am. I really am. I believe that at local levels, that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where you can have more of a direct influence on somebody's life than anyone at the state or national level. We had a woman whose son, single mother, she worked as a maid downtown in Denver. Her son was truant, was not attending school. The problem was the mom had to get on the bus, go downtown so early to get to her job that her son had the freedom to decide whether or not to attend school. By buying that individual a car through the Arapahoe Foundation, we got her a car. We worked with her boss at the hotel to have her start time a little bit later. She was able to drive her child to school, sit in the first class with them, and actually make sure that the child was in school and get to her job on time. It was a simple thing. We bought a used car for about $2,000 or $3,000, and it made a difference in that individual's life. That kid graduated from high school valedictorian. So making a difference, it's definitely there. I encourage everyone, run for office. I think I already put my contact information in the chat box. I'm willing to talk to anyone. Someone wanted to know what you have to know to be a county commissioner. So the Colorado Revised Statutes, Title 30, everything about county commissioners is right in there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner Baker. Thank you, George Brockler. Thank you, Kelly Rennis, and thank you, Kristin Seidel. And I appreciate you mentioning Emma Martz, our events coordinator, who helps put these together, Dean Paul Teskey, on behalf of the School of Public Affairs, where our motto is lead, solve, change. We invite all of you who are still on, the hardcore folks who wanted to wrap up the conversation with us, and those who will watch the tape of this. Thank you for spending time with us. We would invite you to tap into the school at publicaffairs.cudenver.edu. Come back in March for our next First Friday. Again, my thanks to all of our stellar panelists. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for your service. I can only imagine that in many cases people, and while I realize there are some compensation, I think that in many cases people don't realize what a ringer it is to go through this. So I do appreciate you for stepping up and serving. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap. Everyone have a great afternoon, have a great weekend, and join us again next month. Thanks so much.